The slap landed sharp and sudden, loud enough to silence Forks mid-air and freeze a diner full of strangers. A broad, leather-clad biker stood over a frail old man in a booth, his hands still hanging in the air as if daring anyone to question what he had just done. The man he struck, thin, white-haired and 85 years old, did not move to defend himself. His hand trembled faintly where it rested on the edge of his coffee cup. He did not lift his eyes. He simply sat there, shoulders stooped, gaze lowered, as though the humiliation was heavier than the sting on his cheek. For a moment, the diner seemed to hold its breath. The smell of fried eggs and burnt coffee lingered above the stunned silence. Then a nervous laugh from another biker at the corner booth broke the tension, an ugly sound that made the injustice cut deeper. The old man remained still. He neither demanded apology nor called for help. His silence was not weakness. It was something else, something that unsettled those who dared look closely. Some whispered at their tables, but turned their faces away. The waitress behind the counter gripped her order pad tightly, her knuckles white, but she did not speak. Fear moved through the room like a draft no one could block, and the biker who had struck the old man leaned closer, sneering. He spat words that carried no weight against the quiet dignity of the man he insulted. The veteran's name was Walter Hayes. He had lived through storms most in that diner could not imagine. Though his bones were brittle and his breath shorter than it once was, there remained a steady fire within him, a fire that decades of service had forged, but which he never displayed, like a weapon. He had buried friends beneath foreign soil. He had felt the weight of folded flags in trembling hands. He had learned that silence often carried more strength than fury. As Walter sat in that booth, absorbing the strike without retaliation, fragments of his past stirred in him like old photographs coming into focus. He remembered the acrid stench of smoke in Vietnam, the hiss of rain on rusted helmets, the desperate grip of a friend bleeding out in his arms. He remembered homecomings where crowds cheered, and others where silence had greeted him like an unspoken dismissal. Service had carved lines into his soul, more than into his face. And still, he carried on with quiet grace. Now, here in this small-town diner, the same silence became his defense. Not because he lacked strength, but because strength meant knowing when not to use it. The biker mistook it for weakness. Most did. He shoved Walter's shoulder, trying to provoke him further. A fork clattered to the floor from another booth. Still, Walter did not raise his hand. His cheek burned red, but his gaze remained lowered to the coffee cooling in his cup. That stillness unsettled even the men who had laughed a moment earlier. They did not understand it, but they felt it, a calm that made their bravado seem hollow. Somewhere in the back of the diner, unnoticed, a young man slipped out the door with his phone already to his ear. He had watched enough, and though his voice trembled as he explained what had just happened, the message reached someone who would not hesitate. Walter's son. Michael Hayes was not just a son. He was a commander, a soldier forged by the very lessons his father had once passed on. When the call came, he was less than 30 minutes away, finishing breakfast with a few of his men after an early training exercise. The words, "Your father, Dinah, struck," were enough to ignite something primal in him. He excused himself quietly, his face unreadable, but those who followed him knew the tone of unshakable resolve when they heard it. They went with him, back inside the diner. The tension thickened. Walter reached slowly for a napkin, dabbed at the corner of his mouth where the slap had left a faint trace of blood. His hands did not shake now. If anything, they grew steadier with each breath. He thought of his wife, long gone, who used to remind him that true strength often whispers rather than shouts. He thought of the countless times he had chosen restraint when anger could have ruled him. His silence was not surrender. It was discipline. Minutes passed like hours. The bikers grew louder, their laughter forced, as if trying to mask the unease settling among them. The other patrons avoided eye contact, each caught between fear and shame for their own inaction. Walter remained the eye of the storm, unmoved, watching the condensation slide down his untouched water glass. And then, without fanfare, the diner door opened. Michael entered first, tall, broad-shouldered. his uniform neat though his expression was anything but. Behind him, several soldiers followed, their boots striking the floor in quiet rhythm. They did not need to speak. Their presence was thunder in silence. Every head in the diner turned. The bikers' laughter faltered. One by one, their bravado cracked. Michael's eyes locked on his father's reddened cheek, then on the man who had caused it. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked to the booth where his father sat. The gesture said everything. Respect, protection, unbroken bond. Walter finally lifted his gaze. Their eyes met, and for a moment it was as though the decades between them collapsed. The boy who had once learned to ride a bike under his father's steady hand, now standing before him as a protector in his own right. Neither needed to speak. Michael turned then, his voice calm but carrying weight that silenced the room. He did not curse, he did not threaten. He simply told the biker that he had struck not just a man, but a soldier who had given more for this country than that biker could ever repay. He spoke of dignity, of sacrifice, of the quiet strength that men like his father carried. His words cut sharper than fists ever could. The biker shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence draining beneath the steady stares of soldiers who had faced far greater threats than him. The room seemed smaller now, the walls closing in as every diner patron watched the power shift unfold. No one cheered, no one laughed. They simply witnessed justice taking form, not through violence, but through respect reclaimed. Walter, still seated, finally spoke, his voice soft but carrying across the room. He said that a man who strikes the old reveals only the weakness in his own heart. He reminded the room that silence is not cowardice but control, and that sometimes the greatest battles are won without lifting a hand. The words sank deep, leaving no space for rebuttal. The soldiers did not need to touch the bikers. Their presence alone was enough. One by one, the men lowered their eyes, some shifting uneasily toward the exit. The leader, the one who had struck Walter, swallowed hard but found no words. Whatever power he thought he held had vanished the moment silent honor walked through that door. A hush fell over the diner, heavy but cleansing. Then something remarkable happened. A man at the counter stood and placed his hand over his heart. Another followed, then another, until the entire diner, waitress, cook, trucker, and traveler alike, stood in silent respect for the old man who had borne the slap with dignity that outshone aggression. Tears welled in eyes that had moments before looked away in fear. The waitress set down her pad and whispered an apology for not intervening sooner. Walter only nodded, his expression kind, his silence forgiving. Michael remained beside him, standing tall not just as a son, but as a soldier honoring the man who had first taught him what true strength meant. For a long while, the room stayed in that silence, a silence no longer of fear but of reverence. When Walter finally rose to his feet, leaning lightly on his cane, the crowd parted. No one spoke. They only watched as he walked out, his son at his side, the soldiers following like shadows of honor. The bikers did not move until they were gone. Outside, the morning sun had risen higher, washing the street in light. Walter paused at the curb, breathing in the crisp air. He felt no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet pride that the lessons of restraint and respect had taken root in the son who now shielded him. That day, the diner became more than a place for eggs and coffee. It became a testament to silent dignity and the unseen strength carried by those who served. Word of what happened spread quickly, retold in whispers that grew louder until the story traveled far beyond the town itself. People repeated the moment the soldiers arrived, the hush that fell the old man's word. And so Walter's lesson endured, that sometimes the greatest show of strength is in silence, and sometimes justice does not roar, but stands quietly until the world can no longer ignore it. To this day, those who hear the story remember the slap, yes, but they remember more clearly the silence that followed, the son who arrived with his brothers in arms, and the diner that stood still as respect reclaimed its place. Because respect is not demanded by fists or noise. It is earned in sacrifice, in restraint, in the quiet, unshakable honor of those who have given more than most will ever understand. And perhaps that is the lesson we are left with. that every elder carries battles unseen, every veteran walks with ghosts we cannot name, and every moment of respect withheld is a wound, not just to them but to us all. Let us not wait until injustice strikes before we stand. Let us honor while they are still among us. Wherever you are watching from tonight, may you remember Walter Hayes and men like him, silent heroes who teach us that dignity needs no defense. If this story moved you, share it, speak of it, let it live beyond the walls of a single diner. And if you carry respect for those who served, let it show, because sometimes the quietest gestures echo the loudest.